into the dust.
As you know, archaeology is a discipline that covers an incredible range of material, from stuff as tiny as DNA, now to something much, much bigger. I'm going to talk about a recent LIDAR survey. LIDAR stands for Light Detection and Ranging. First developed in the 1960s, the use of LIDAR in archaeology really came to fruition in the 2000s as the technology became cheaper and lighter and hence could be deployed off of even smallish drones. Now, what LIDAR does is these lasers
begin laser ignition sequence.
Begin laser ignition!
are sort of strong enough to penetrate forest cover and topsoil to map things below the ground. Now, how does that work? Essentially, the LIDAR system can calculate the time and then hence translate that into distance that it takes for that laser beam to bounce back to the drone if it's being deployed from a drone. And the result of that, this sort of time distance calculations, is sort of an elevation map of those features underneath the ground. And you'll see lots of examples of this as we talk. Now, this has been a gold mine for the practice of archaeology in many ways. And one of the key ways is it's essentially resource saving. So long ago, as in like 10 years ago, or even sometimes now when there isn't the ability to use LIDAR, archaeologists would have to do a ground survey and try to find the place where they thought there was stuff to be found. And a lot of times this was a lot of guesswork and very hit or miss. Well, now using LIDAR, they have a pretty good idea where the stuff is that they're looking for. So it actually makes digging much more efficient, a lot lower failure rate if you already know that there's something under there. And this is so important because archaeology is resource starved. And though archaeologists love to dig, the money is often just not there for it. Anyway, like just about every oversexed archaeology story that breaks into the headlines nowadays, this story involves LIDAR changing everything we know about the course of history. Archaeologists are left perturbed, astounded, puzzled. Yeah, let's just get to the story. So, the Ecuadorian government conducted a LIDAR survey of an area called the Upano Valley that's in the center of the country in an area of the Amazon, that vast rainforest in the tropics of South America. Now, from the looks of the photos, it looks like some of this area has been deforested, unfortunately, which, as we know, happened already to much of the Amazon. And what they found was astounding. This was an area about 300 square kilometers or about 115 square miles. So, what did they find? They found over 6,000 platforms, and subsequently targeted excavations of these revealed that some of them were probably houses, while some of them seemed to be used for other public or, dare we say, ritual purposes. They found 15 distinct settlements home to at least 10,000 people, but probably a lot more. It's very difficult to tell without extensive excavations, and even with excavations, there's a lot of guesswork involved. Now, these settlements were linked by roads, straight roads, wide roads, some of them as wide as 10 meters or 33 feet, and long roads, some as long as 16 miles or over 25 kilometers. Now, the fact that these roads were straight tells us some important things. Remember, it's a lot harder to build a straight road than it is one that just sort of naturally follows the contours of the land. This means these people had understanding of sort of advanced construction, engineering, and mathematical techniques, which is pretty amazing considering the age of the site. Carbon dating suggests that these sites were built about 2,500 years ago and were inhabited for about 1,000 years. So we're basically overlapping totally with the Roman period. meaning there was a civilization in South America that had advanced road building techniques at that time in the Amazon forest. Now, also, they found some evidence of defensive works. So what we're seeing is massive public engineering and construction projects. Unbelievable. All of this points to the existence of this previously unknown sophisticated civilization that could build these massive things. Imagine it's basically like a Maya or Aztec or Inca civilization unknown sitting beneath the Amazon forest. This is particularly surprising given the supposed consensus prior to these findings that there was really no large-scale settlements in the Amazon region in ancient times. It was thought that there were just small groups of people who didn't leave much of a trace. It was also a particular personal triumph for one Professor Stéphane Rostin, who's the Director of Investigation at the National Center for Scientific Research in France. He had found evidence decades ago of these settlements on the ground doing archaeology, but he was warned not to pursue this line of investigation considering that so-called consensus. And so in challenging it, that would be career suicide. So what did he do? Like any good archaeologist, he continued to look for this civilization like a dog with a bone and challenge that consensus. So you know what they say, if at first you don't succeed, try, and try again. And that's just what he did, culminating in this study. Next, we move on to a story from Uzbekistan, where two ancient cities dating back to early medieval times have recently been discovered. And the hero of this story is our trusty friend, LIDAR. To make it simple, this involves a plane flying low over a site back and forth, shooting down lasers which then bounce back. Now, based on the time it takes for the lasers to bounce back, we can calculate the distance because we know the speed of light. And based on the strength of the light that bounces back and the intensity, we can also tell something about the density of the stuff that it hits, and therefore create a sort of map, an elevation map of the area below the airplane. Well, you don't actually do the calculations, a computer does, and it uses those to create the image. And what's even better for archaeology is LIDAR can penetrate even dense vegetation. So this makes it very useful for a number of other disciplines like agriculture, mining, forestry and water management, etc. Anyway, if you want to know more, I went into detail about all of this in Archaeology News when we featured the discovery of that city in the Amazon of Ecuador. So the area of Uzbekistan where these cities were discovered is a pretty desolate place. And how do I know that? Because I actually spent some time there among the local people, a pretty tough bunch who traced their ancestry all the way back to Alexander the Great, who did make it there with his army, and scratching out a living in the pretty rugged terrain. The climate is harsh and the elevation, about 6,500 to 7,200 feet, or 2,000 to 2,200 meters, makes the conditions difficult. The climate is dry and there are flash floods, and the elevation also makes for extremes of temperature. To give you a sense, this is about 30% higher than Denver, Colorado, the mile-high city, and about on par with Addis Ababa or Machu Picchu. Now, for context, less than 3% of the world population live at this elevation, even with all of our modern technology. And it's so high, in fact, that archaeologists just assumed this area was as sparsely populated in the past as it is today. The region was, of course, linked by the Great Silk Road, which connected another city I lived in, Xi'an, China, with the West. Now, as you probably know, the Silk Road was not one continuous paved route, but a series of tradeways that linked China with South and Central Asia, all the way to Europe. And it was previously believed that along the Silk Road in Central Asia, cities tended to be low-lying to take advantage of the trade, probably water, and they used fortifications rather than elevation for defenses. So in Uzbekistan, this would be Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, etc. However, the recent discoveries of these two cities changes all of that, as they were way up in high elevation in a barren area. Based on tips from local people, investigations of the area took place in 2011 and 2015. As we've discussed, it takes a long time to publish anything in academia, especially archaeology, because processing all the data takes forever, and in the meantime you want to keep the sites a secret to deter any grave robbers, treasure hunters, or aspiring Indiana Jones types. The team, a collaboration between Uzbekistan's National Center of Archaeology and Washington University in St. Louis, conducted some initially promising test digs and surveys, and therefore decided to do a more extensive search using LIDAR. And what they found astounded them. The site was about 120 hectares in area, and to give you a sense, that's twice the size of Pompeii. So the city could have accommodated tens of thousands of people. There were around 300 structures ranging from small houses to massive fortifications, and an industrial-sized area of steel and iron production, indicating the economic focal point of the settlement. It was thought that the inhabitants leveraged the wind and the nearby forests for fuel in order to power this industry. Then, radiocarbon dating of some of the organic remains yielded equally surprising results, showing that the site was active from the 6th to the 11th centuries, so starting more than 1500 years ago. Now, for reasons totally unknown to me, the city was dubbed Tugun Bulak. They could have picked an easier name, right? But also intriguingly, a much smaller city, about 10% of the size, so 12 hectares, was found about 3 miles or 5 kilometers away. And this smaller city dated a little bit later, from the 8th to the 11th centuries, so there was an overlap, and the material remains suggested the two sites were related. And this smaller town was called Tashboulak. Yeah, I know, names. But what made this site so intriguing is it had a very large cemetery for a site of that size, with around 400 burials. This is important because organized religion, specifically the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have very uniform ways of dealing with the dead, whereas the religions that preceded them usually were more casual about it.
Whoa. But because man did not have the time for complicated rituals, funeral services were often brief.
This is why in my area of the world, for example, early medieval Britain, many of the cemeteries are quite small, often lack children entirely, suggesting that something else was done with the other people. Not everyone was buried in the cemetery, and there were different ways of disposing of the dead. But the 8th to 11th centuries in which Tashboulak flourished also coincided with the spread of Islam to the area, and it was said that the burials were in an Islamic fashion. Now, I'm not 100% sure what that indicates, but I'm guessing it means that they faced Mecca and they were without grave goods. Moreover, historical sources in Arabic do mention large cities in this area, but none have ever been found. So this is a great example of how technology like LIDAR is changing archaeology, and how archaeology can help to support the historical narrative, creating a much better understanding of the past. It's also great to see a story coming out of Uzbekistan, considering that country's in the process of liberalizing, so it's probably easier to operate there than it used to be, and hopefully we'll see more good news. It's also cool to cover a place that I've been. Now, a lot more work has to be done, but the team's current hypothesis as to why these cities declined was essentially that they stripped the area bare of trees, creating erosion and water management problems, and it just became too difficult, therefore, to sustain a population up that high. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.